I've had a lot of fun this summer. I think especially for me, growing up, I was more of an actor. I've never been part of the production or the developmental side of theater.
Life-changing sounds very grand, but I think that it's not a bad way to describe the time that I've had here.
The theater program has been really exciting. I haven't done a lot of theater before. I've done a little bit in high school, and so this was like a really new experience for me.
Over the course of the summer, I've written a play. I've gotten to help with like directing and staging and things of that nature. So for me, it's just been really nice to get to know other sides of theater and find out what like other things I'm interested in. So like costume design or play development and things like that.
Working in theater has been just very eye-opening to possibilities for exploring it later, both at Williams and as a career.
What made this program special for me is definitely the opportunity to work on an independent project for basically the full 6 weeks. Five of the weeks we would have our own instructor who would help us in the process and sort of answer any questions and give us any inspiration that we might need.
I've really enjoyed the Luminary seminars that have been offered by the program, specifically being able to hear from so many BIPOC artists about how they brought their own cultural backgrounds and histories and identities into work and created spaces where they didn't feel that they were previously available for. It's been really inspiring to note.
After watching all of the Luminary sessions and then working in the Luminary labs, I think it's really inspiring to see all of the ideas that the Luminary speakers have brought to us and all of the encouragement that they're giving to people who are maybe hoping to start in the business or just hoping to, still develop their interest.
It was a lot of different people, so not only are you sitting there for an hour and a half listening to someone that you may not know anything about their area of expertise, but then we would go to a lab session in which professionals who were our advisors would come and do workshops with us. So 1 week was a playwriting workshop, which we all had to write a 5 to 7 page script and then have a read through the next day. And for me, that was something I've never done. I've never written a play, so I was definitely a little terrified and I was definitely very nervous when we were doing our read through. But I think overall I ended up liking the experience.
Speaking from my own personal experience, I was kind of a little nervous before because I haven't had a lot of theater experience, but I would say that definitely don't let that stop you. You definitely don't have to be a theater major or have a lot of experience to really get a lot out of the program.
For me, I think I really wanted to explore other areas of theater besides acting, and I knew that the program would allow me to play with the developmental side as well as designing, staging, and things of that nature, and I wanted to do it in a place that I felt comfortable and I felt like I could explore, make mistakes, and I wouldn't get penalized for it. It was a safe place to experiment.
All right. It seems like we're ready to rock and roll. Okay, again, my name is Omar Sangare, chair of the theater department at Williams College, and I'm absolutely thrilled to have yet another phenomenal session for us to enjoy. The session that was conceived with Williamstown Theatre Festival. How fantastic and how thankful we are, Mandy and Maya, allowing us to join our educational programs and bring theater giants to meet and talk to our students and participants. I will not take too much time because time is precious, especially when we have Lynn with us. I will skip the intro to not let other repeat the same thing. My intro to Lynn is I am notorious fan of Lynn. And I've been looking for Lynn for years. And I previously said to Lynn, it was hard to find her because to me, she was always behind yet another award coming on her desk. Congrats to all. I will pass right now my voice to Mandy and then to our moderators. Again, Lynn, thank you for joining our session, and I can't wait to go through it and enjoy it. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't know that I have much to add. It's a fact. The woman has won everything there is to win, including 2 Pulitzer Prizes. One for a play I had the honor of producing with her off Broadway, a play called Ruined, back in 2000. I think we did it in 8, she won it in 9. And of course, her play Sweat, which also enjoyed an extraordinary Broadway run. We have the pleasure of sitting on a board together, the Lilly Awards Foundation, for which Lynn is championing an incredible effort to make and have installed a statue of Lorraine Hansberry that will elevate her name, her legacy, and her work into the theatrical landscape in which it undeniably already belongs. She is a brilliant teacher. She's fun to drink with. We won't be drinking here today, but we will be learning from her today. I'm very grateful to her for giving us some of her very precious and in-demand time. And with that, I give you the singular Lynn Nottage.
Thank you, Mandy. Thank you, Omar. I'm really glad actually to be in this space with all of you. I've been on sabbatical from teaching for the last year, so it's very nice to be with students and to be in conversation. I actually didn't realize how much I actually miss it, so I appreciate this invitation, and I put myself in service to you to answer your questions, because I'm sure you have a few, and please don't be shy, and there's no question that's too small to ask. I've been in this business for 25 years or so, maybe even more than that. So I know it's like to be an emerging playwright, a mid-career playwright, and someone recently called me an elder. So I have crossed over to the other side. So I look forward to this conversation.
Superb. Can you introduce yourself, our moderators from both groups?
Hi, I'm Vashante Brown. I am with WTF, the Theater Makers, and I do want to start by saying, like, Miss Nottage, I don't know if you'll ever know how much your plays have done for me and what Intimate Apparel did to me as learning what it could be to be Black in the American theater. And I am so honored to be here and to be moderating this conversation.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Look forward.
And Pat, we have you on our side.
Maddie, I think that you are muted. We can't hear you. There might be something wrong with your mic.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Awesome.
Bingo.
Awesome. My name is Maddie. I'm from the Williams New Summer Theater Program. And Professor, thank you so much for meeting with us today. We're all kind of freaking out. So if you'll have patience with us with how excited we are. But I think what we've normally been doing is just passing around of all of us young people asking different questions. So if we want to go ahead and get started, if anyone has any burning questions that they want to kick us off with.
I can get us started with the text that you suggested that we read, Malima's Tale. It is one of exploitation, and then the heartbreak of it is in the exploitation of like the actual like the bit that he can offer, but what is taken and the beauty of it, what it means to have been taken from him. I just want to know your thought process of why his presence was also felt even after his death.
Sure, that's a great question. And I guess I can begin just by talking a little bit about the evolution of the play, because I think that will sort of lead to actually your question. Malima's Tale really came out of conversations that I was having with film director Catherine Bigelow a number of years ago about how we could really raise awareness about poaching of elephants in Africa. Both of us were really alarmed. It was truly catastrophic, and we felt that there was a strong story there, but we wanted to find a way to tell it on a very visceral level. We didn't just want to create something that was pedantic or didactic that, you know, people engage with, but that didn't really drive the point home. And as a result, I ended up taking a very deep dive into research and looking at interviews with poachers, with conservationists, with game wardens. I decided to tell a ghost story, beginning with, you know, the voice of this very magnificent elephant, and then trace his ill-fated journey from his death all the way to the hands of the consumer in China, and, you know, set it in a kind of a Laurent structure in which each scene there's a sense of escalation and a furthering of the journey.
Thank you so much. And I also had a question about sort of within the context of the text, or contents of the text, the residue that was left on each player by the presence of Malema. I was wondering, that reminded me of the production of Hamlet that the Royal Shakespeare Company did with all of the colors that were exploding on everyone. And I was wondering where the inspiration for that sort of motif came from and how it was realized in the design at the public. Like, was it used with chalk powder? What did it look like?
Sure, it's interesting because discovering that actually took some time. I knew that I wanted Malema to leave some mark on everyone that he encountered, but at the time, I didn't know what that mark was going to be. I had recently seen a production of an African company, I can't remember the name, dance company that had specialized in sort of merging Butu dance with West African dance, and so they danced in the dust that is used in Butu dance, leaving this residue that goes all over the stage. And I thought, oh, that might be interesting if by the end of the piece everyone was just covered in dust. And we began experimenting with that, and the actors were coughing, and the dust got really messy, and it didn't, take us to where we want to go. But one of the things about the process of making Malema is that we did it differently than I've done some of my other plays. When I was talking to Joe Bonney, who was the director of the piece, I said, I want all of the designers to be in the room from beginning to end, so that the piece is made holistically. I don't want to talk to the designers for 2 hours at the top and then see them during tech. I want to figure out how we make this show from top to bottom so it does feel like one gesture instead of sort of the amalgamation of many different pieces sort of randomly coming together, which sometimes happens in theater. And so we were fortunate to have Jen Moeller, who was the costume designer, with us. And we began just experimenting with what that gesture could be. And, we experimented with paint, with dust, and we finally came across this paint, which was very thick, which the actor could just wipe across the clothing or the face, or, leave on chairs. And that's how we came up with it. It was really through experimentation and also the rehearsal process.
Jumping in, hi, Ms. Nottage. My name is Anthony Shepard. I'm one of the theater makers. Nice to meet you. I was just curious about what were the challenges and opportunities that you found? What were the benefits and cons of having the designers involved in that process for the whole time? I think obviously there's the financial side of it, in which you have to have all those people and they have to be paid to spend all that time in the room. But also, it just, like you said, it really is a chance for you to weave something together. So I guess what were the benefits and the drawbacks of that situation?
Well, the benefits is that everyone who was part of the creative process really felt that they had a voice in it, which was really lovely. And we had a composer named Justin Hicks who was composing the music as we were making the piece, which was really lovely. And there's this one moment where you talk about what are the benefits and what are the cons, where he decided that he wanted to play the music live throughout the entire piece. And he's someone who doesn't come from musical theater. I mean, he's very much a musician, and he's used to gigging and playing concerts. And during, I think it was the first or second preview, he was playing his drum and he was singing, and he got so into it that he forgot that he was in conversation with the people on the stage. And I just remember Kevin Mambo, one of the actors, like looking at him saying, "I'm talking here." But he was so fully integrated in the piece that he kind of forgotten that he was in dialogue with someone else. But I really felt like there were no downsides to having the designers there. I mean, for me, I learned more about their process, which I found really helpful in when I was making my rewrites. And I think that they learned more about my process, and they were able to be flexible in the way in which they approach their design. I think so often when you begin the rehearsal process, you think the play is going to be one thing, and you have all these discoveries, but the designers don't often have the benefit of going through that process, and so they're still invested in that initial design that they came up with. And sometimes when you get to the end, there's pushback, and you find that you have to shoehorn your discoveries into a design that may not necessarily be in dialogue with what you have been exploring in the rehearsal room. But we didn't have that, because we were all moving in the same direction at the same time.
I have a question. Hi, my name is Joy. Sorry, I'm on my phone. My Zoom on my computer decided to crash. So, but I'm one of the theater makers. And I wanted to ask you about there's a more general question about how you pick collaborators and how you found like the people who understand you best, especially when trying to accomplish goals of creating theater that's just impactful and also true to your experience and also the people who are making it with you.
I mean, that's a great question. It's a really important question, and I guess the way that I answer it is, I think of, the writer-director or the writer-designer relationship as being this intricate tango, that a dance that is between all of these people who have the same goal, but may, be dancing to a different rhythm at first. And you have to figure out, how do you bring this play that's on the page to into three dimensions. And I respond to directors who lead with questions. At the very top is that people, rather than imposing their sensibilities, because I've worked with those people who, like, they come in and they feel like they know everything and want to sort of, once again, shoehorn your play into their concept. But I find that it's very immensely helpful to have conversations with your collaborators about form and content to ensure that you're on the same page. I remember taking this collaboration workshop, and one of the things that the leader said is that you have to, at the very top of your process, talk about what it is you're making. Are you making a musical? Are you making a chamber opera? Are you making, a piece with music? Because you may think you're making a musical, and your director may think that you're making a chamber opera, so that you have a shared vocabulary and understand exactly what your target is at the very beginning of the process. Because, working with a director, particularly someone you don't know, is this true leap of faith, particularly for a writer, and is that you are surrendering a lot of your control in order to meet that other person's creative agenda. And, it's kind of like allowing someone to come into your home and rearrange the furniture. And so you have to trust that you have the same taste as that interior decorator. Otherwise, it's going to be an absolute disaster.
Hi, Ms. Nottage. I'm Raven, and I'm from the Theater Maker program. And yeah, I kind of have a question. I wonder if you could elaborate more about your research process on topics that may sometimes border on exoticism, and also how do you want your work to be presented on stage? Because for me as a designer, I think Ruined is a very hard play to design, because how should you, to what extent should you present a setting that is so foreign to most of the audience that the play is going to be for? So I don't know what I'm talking about. But
you unpack just what you mean by exoticism, so that I can answer your question more specifically.
For example, when the play is about a place that may not be as familiar as America to most of the American audience. Especially a third
I can answer that question There's a play that, because really my deep dive research process began with a play called Ruined, which was about gender-specific human rights abuses, specifically looking at how rape was used as a tool of war during the war in the Democratic Republic of Congo, which was the largest war since World War II. I mean, by the end of that war, 6 million people had died, and yet most of you probably don't even know about it or know the extent of the violence that was there. And so I did this very, very deep dive into trying to learn what was happening to women, because it wasn't on the front pages of newspapers. It wasn't even on the back pages of newspapers. And I took several trips to East Africa where I interviewed many Congolese women who were fleeing that conflict, but not just Congolese women. I also interviewed Somali women and women from the Sudan, because there were these wars that were going on, all these different fronts, trying to figure out, how to tell that story. And one of my ways in came after my first visit. Someone had taken a picture of me with a group of Congolese women, and at the time I was wearing this very colorful bubu, which was very similar to what the women were wearing. And when I got home, because this is the old days before you had a digital camera, I actually had to wait for those photographs to be processed. And when I got them, I was sort of going through all of the photographs, and I didn't realize that I was there. I didn't see myself. I saw them, and I realized I'm not telling their story, I'm telling my own story. And once I realized that I was telling my story, it gave me really easy access, is that I am one of these women, and I have to figure out, if I were in those circumstances, how would I behave? So I didn't separate myself from them. And then the other thing, it's a phrase that I probably overused now, but it's something that I find immensely valuable, is replacing judgment with curiosity. Is that I always go into a situation with a kind of openness and naivete that I think allows me really to ask the kind of questions that aren't about imposing my sensibilities, but really trying to understand what a situation is. And I think that's a way to avoid, sort of exploiting or creating some sort of trauma porn or exoticizing a situation that you don't necessarily understand. And so I try to immerse myself. When I was doing Sweat, I spent 2 years in Reading, Pennsylvania, unpacking that play and getting to know people. So by the time I sat down to write that play, I wasn't just writing about people who were somewhat distant from me. I was writing about people who I had spent hours upon hours in conversation with, who really unburdened themselves, because the first 2 conversations you learn very little, but a year and a half in, when you're having a drink at a bar with someone, they're going to sort of open up their hearts in ways that are unexpected. And so I think that the short way of answering that question is that I invest the time. I'm incredibly patient, a playwright, and I don't write before I feel it's time for me to sit down and write. I don't write before I feel like I have a sense of what it is that I want to write. And sometimes, that means like facing down that blank page for a year.
Speaking on that, at the festival, at least with the theater makers, we've been really, pondering the question of, audiences when it comes to creating things, and especially with some of the programming here and what it means to create something for a certain audience, and maybe that audience isn't seeing it. And I was just wondering, in your approach to just writing, do you write towards audience or do you not? And do you care about things like the white gaze, or do you not?
You know what, I don't care so much about the white gaze. I think that I remain true to the story that I want to tell, but I am hyper aware that a lot of times the stories that I'm telling are going to be in spaces in which the audience isn't as diverse and receptive to the material, but so be it. I mean, one of the things that I pride myself in is that my plays get done equally in white spaces as they do at, African American theaters throughout the country. And I think it's because those institutions know that I'm not writing to the white gaze, is that I'm telling stories that really come from a more organic place, and I hate using the word universal, but I do think that because of the specific way in which I write, the work ends up being more universal. I take something like Ruined, which is very specifically about a group of Black women in Africa. One of the first production requests that I got after we did it in America was in Cambodia. And when I was in Cambodia, I thought there's no way that this story is going to translate. And there were 4 women who were directing it, which I thought was interesting. And all the 4 women were survivors of the Khmer Rouge. They were young women when they were put into prison camps. And this is sort of a long way to tell the story, but I remember there's a specific moment in which there's a young woman who's playing one of the characters, and she had to cry. And in Cambodia, there's sometimes very presentational acting, and she began to cry, and she cried like this, and she was using her hands to cry. And one of the women stopped her and said, "No, that's not how you cry." And she became so angry. She's like, "Do you understand what these women have been through?" And she began to shout, and I realized that she was no longer talking about the play, but she was talking about her own experience of having her body be ravaged. And I thought, oh, I'm also telling her story, but telling the specificity, but using the specificity of these African women. This woman in Cambodia was able to enter that story. So, I think I am, when I'm writing, I like to think that I'm writing for my mother, who died relatively young, and she didn't get to see my plays. And so I feel like a lot of times I'm writing things that she would enjoy because she was a great consumer of art. I write for my friends because usually those are the first people who come and see my previews, and I think, well, what will make this specific friend laugh and what will delight this person? But ultimately, I'm writing to entertain myself and to explore questions that I have. And, I have the privilege of being able to explore those questions out loud, but I'm not really thinking about, that Uber audience that's going to be at Williamstown. I'm thinking about, the smaller audience that's really going to embrace the work that I'm doing.
I love how you talked about the sort of specificity in your work that conveys into a universality. And among the theater makers, we've been having a conversation about what it sort of means to be a Black artist, and how the two terms are interwoven but also completely separate. So I guess, how has the term Black artist or Black playwright or Black writer defined you? How has it confined you? How has it liberated you? And how do all of those things translate into your work?
It's really interesting because it's been a journey. Because the notion of being a Black artist when I first began is really different than what it means to be a Black artist today. When I started, when I first started going to theater, I really was very fortunate in that I grew up at a moment in which there were a number of African American theaters that were thriving in New York City, like the Negro Ensemble and the New Federal Theater and the Billie Holiday Theater. So my first encounters with theater were Black stories, and told by Black writers and with Black directors and a Black audience. And so I had the comfort of discovering really my love for the craft and an audience and that looked very much like me. So my initial encounter with the work was not one of resistance or struggle, but of one of inclusion. But then when I decided that I was going to take the journey as a playwright, that experience really shifted because, the Negro Ensemble went out of business, and, the New Federal Theater completely contracted, and Billie Holiday Theater also contracted and began, telling smaller stories and didn't have the resources. And I had to, fish in a bigger pond to find a way to sustain myself in this industry. And what I was met with initially was real resistance. I was told repeatedly, that my stories were not really worthy of the big stage. And it took many, many years just to fight to get onto the small stage, let alone the big stage. And one of the things that I had to do is build a coalition of people around me, other artists who were telling stories like me, to form like a little posse that could ride up on these theaters and sort of demand to be seen. And so I think that so much of my craft when I was young was defined by the need to be seen. And, and that probably affected the way in which I wrote, because I thought, I want a bigger platform. How does one get a bigger platform? What choices does one make? And how does one penetrate this business? And I think that now I'm in a position where my stories are told on the main stage, where I have much more confidence about my voice. I am living fully inside of my body because I am a woman of a certain age, and I feel an absolute necessity to celebrate all aspects of myself, not just, the beautiful aspects, but the ugly aspects. And I can really sustain that complexity on the stage and not be afraid to put those tensions out there, which I think are really important, because I think that so often as Black writers, we feel like we have to tell one kind of story, and we're afraid to really explore the full complications of what it means to be Black storytellers or Black people in America. And now I feel that we have enough of a critical mass where we don't only have to put our heroes on stage. There's enough of a critical mass where, we can lean into some of the more complicated tales that, show our butts and, the parts that we don't necessarily allow others to see. And so it's been a real journey from where I was when I first entered this business to where I am now. But also, there's so much more opportunity than there used to be. I mean, the fact that I'm about to enter a season on Broadway where there's 7 Black plays. That's kind of unheard of. It's like when I did Sweat on Broadway, I was one of 2 women in that season, and it's the first time any women had a play on Broadway in like 10 years. And so the climate has changed. We have to figure out how we keep those doors open. And it's so interesting to talk to young people about struggle. And I want to say, it's like, oh God, you have no idea. The fact that I'm even here talking to you with my little bundle of awards and the opportunities that I have is so different than the experience that I had when I was a young person.
I have a question, if I can jump right in there. Hi, my name is Sean. Pleasure meeting you.
Good to meet you.
I just had a question. I was sitting here thinking, and as I read the play yesterday, I was thinking about myself, how after all these years do you continue?
I'm losing your voice. I can't hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yes.
All right, I will speak louder.
Thank you.
I don't know if that'll help, but I was asking, after all these years of writing, how do you continue to stay motivated to write and for yourself, not for other people, I guess. How do you still find it, not self-motivating, but fulfilling? That's the word I'm looking for. How do you find it fulfilling after all these years?
I think my answer to the question is part and parcel with the previous questions. I think that there's still so many stories I want to tell and so many stories that need to be told. I feel like I could write until I'm 100 years old and still there is more that I want to put out there into the universe. And I think that that's what fuels me and keeps me motivated. I mean, that said, there are moments in which I absolutely do feel blocked, and I feel like, oh, I'm exhausted. Oh, there are lots of young people who can just fill this gap. But then I see plays and I think, oh, they're not telling the story the way I would tell it, or they're not telling the story that I want to see. And that's really the fuel that allows me to continue to write. And also the other thing is that I just really love doing it. I love being a storyteller. I'm an introverted person, and so the only way I can get out there is by writing plays.
Thank you very much.
I have another question. RIP, not sorry. I think we, the theater makers recently, and this group as well, recently met with Clint Ramos, the designer on Slave Play, and he talked about how he cannot mentor this next generation of artists in the same way that he was mentored because he has different needs. So I guess now that you are crossing into elder territory, what are you finding from the previous generation that you're like, okay, we need to put that down, that definitely needs to stay, I need to give this, I need to give that, or how are you making that sort of difference in your life?
I've been mentoring writers for 20 years. It's part of my practice. I don't see that as separate from who I am, and I think it's in part because I didn't feel nurtured and mentored when I first came onto the scene. I think that a lot of what I was told is this is going to be hard, it's going to do this. I was constantly met with a lot of resistance and bitterness. I think that a lot of people who I encountered when I came in, the way they mentored was through their own frustrations rather than rather than trying to share their joy. What they shared was their frustrations. And I think that early on really informed how I approached the business. And I decided when I began mentoring, that's just not what I'm going to do. I think of myself really as being a nurturer and a supportive, and figuring out ways in which I can allow someone to unpack and open up their own voice without impeding that voice. I try and really help them navigate this business, because I think that one of the things early on when I hit the ground running is that no one really talked to me about the business of being a playwright and how difficult that was going to be and what tools that I needed. I was just thought, oh, I have a play and someone's going to produce it. I thought, no, this is a business. And I really, for the first 10 years that I was in this business, I could have used the help of someone who took me through all of the intricate steps and who allowed me to see the mistakes that they made. And so I think that when I'm mentoring, I try to be as transparent as possible, but most of all, I try to prop people up. I really, I'm a mom, and I try to treat the people who I mentor with the same kind of love and generosity that I give to my own children, and I try to invest the energy that I have for my children into those creators. And it's important in particular, and I feel like a great sense of pride that the people who I've nurtured, have gone on to win Pulitzer Prizes and are now, nurturers and mentors in their own right. But it's because I did something in part which you all don't see, which is invisible curation, is that, it's not just about sitting down with people and passing your knowledge, but it's also behind the scenes is passing the plays of those people to the theaters. It's sitting on panels so that when those plays come up, you can say, I like that play. It's being on boards of theaters. It's really being part of that ecosystem so that you can change the outcomes for those BIPOC folks who are trying to enter. It's not just about holding someone's hand. It's about figuring out how you can enter and change the entire ecosystem and support them in other ways that they may not even know you're supporting them.
Speaking on that business part, afternoon, Ms. Nottage, thank you so much for being here today. My name is Jahna. I'm a visiting guest artist with the summer theater program here. Speaking of that business aspect, how do you marry the patience that you allow yourself while writing with meeting a deadline that any parts of these businesses might be asking, or occasionally it might feel like demanding of you to meet?
It's one of the things that I tell my students is like every day, and it could be 20 minutes, take 20 minutes to do the business. you know and it could be that you do it at the end of the day where you answer those emails, or one of the things that I make my students do is every month send out your plays to 5 institutions and just do it, and know that you may get 5 rejections, but just make that part of your practice and your ritual, so that 5 years down the line you're not even thinking about it. It's just like rote, that you're just doing it as it comes. And I still do that. It's like I get up in the morning, I do yoga, I meditate, I respond to email for 10-20 minutes, and then I do my work.
I had a question about what you said about you don't only have to put the heroes on stage. And I was wondering about the villains, the converse side of that, when what happens when you get more and more successful, right, in the world of theater. If you have a play that features villains and is trying to say something about them, and then you just have like the white liberal audience of New York saying, thank God that's not me, go home, and not really impacting them in any way that they can accept. I was wondering what the process of writing and portraying villains and difficult systems and messages, how you approach that.
It's interesting. When I was writing Sweat, I was hyper aware that I was putting sort of morally ambiguous people on the stage who were going to challenge some people's sensibilities. And I thought, well, how do I find the humanity in people who I find reprehensible? And that was my job as a dramatist, is to sustain the complexity and to explore those tensions that exist, I think, in all human beings, rather than being binary in my approach. I thought, how do I really allow for the complexities? And I think that that's just become part of my art practice, is not to be afraid of the villains, but to really try and understand what motivates them, to approach it from a truly, purely psychological point of view, as opposed to creating like traditional melodrama, which I think is appealing to lots of people, and we see on television. It's like one of the things that we love about TV is that it is melodrama, is that good and evil are really clearly painted. And I think that one of the beauties of theater is that we have 2 hours in which we can be slightly more nuanced. And with regards to the audience, it's like I can't control what they take away. I can only control the way in which I modulate the storytelling on the stage. And sometimes people take away the wrong message. And I've been in those talkbacks. I'm like, no, that's not what the play is. Like, how did you come away with that? But that's, my responsibility is not to really shape how they feel, but just to give them some way to access their emotions.
And speaking of which, Lynn, I really applaud you for taking a difficult path when creating and writing for theater, because what you bring is quite difficult and challenging, and something I remember coming from European tradition and conservatory training, when we used to view theater as a platform to challenge people's potentials and to provoke thoughts. And very often when I see shows on Broadway, or talking about mainstream in America, with no judgment, I feel that theater is not that much, or the show is not that much important than my filet mignon after the show, or who is wearing a Chanel 5 on the audience. But when I saw your play, Ruin, in New York, I was deeply moved and sort of brought to the core, to the essence of what I strongly believe when exercising and working for theater is just to challenge folks. So how you balance getting to those difficult tasks and difficult themes, sort of opening a box of Pandora, yet remain healthy through the process of writing?
That's a really great question. I mean, I think that one of the things I do enjoy is walking on the razor's edge, that when I'm writing, I'm a little bit scared. Mm-hmm. And I'm a little uncomfortable and afraid of how the audience is going to respond. And if I don't have that feeling, I thought, oh, I'm probably doing something that's not that interesting or exciting. But I think that as writers, that we are somewhat of provocateurs. I describe, the journey of an artist is that we are the people who walk to the edge of the cliff, to the precipice, and look over, even though we know that there may be a big gust of wind behind us, and that everyone else is really the people who stand back and ask, what do you see? And we have to take that chance. We have to walk right up to that edge. And if we're not doing it, then I don't think that we're really making art. I used to believe that, if you didn't cry once during the process, then there's something wrong.
I have a question about Ms. Nottage, about my name is Jason, about what area do you feel, since now you mentioned reaching critical mass with artists creating new work, what area or where do you feel like it's a ripe area for exploration, that because we've done so much putting our heroes on the stage, that are other stories that you find interesting that either you read or that you think that is a topic to go into?
I'll tell you something that I really, really crave that I don't see enough of, is just the story of young people of color negotiating the world. Love stories and family stories. On stage, where are those tales? That's what's lacking for me. It's I just want to see, ordinary folk going through the rigmarole. And I think that there's really space for that now. And I think it's important that those stories be put on stage. It's I would love to see the story about a group of Black students just getting out of college, coming to New York City and trying to find work, and the trials and tribulations of that. I'd like to see that play.
Kind of had a two-parter question, based off of that. The first was, how long did it take you to understand what your imagination looked like and the ways? Sorry, it's not a fully formed question. How long did it take you to really understand what your imagination looked like and the directions that you were comfortable with it taking you in, or understanding, I guess, where your limits were with that, and what mediums do you typically draw inspiration from, in addition to the ones you've already spoken about?
I think so. That's actually a really interesting question, and I guess another way of phrasing it is how did you find your own voice? Because I think really early on, certainly when I was a young playwright, I was very mimetic. It's I thought the way to write a play is the way, Ntozake Shange writes plays, or, the way some of my literary heroes approach the work. And I realized that my imagination didn't necessarily fit very neatly into the box that was created for their imagination. And so what I had to do figure out is how does Lynn Nottage tell a story in a way that's different from the way in which, say, Susan Laurie Parks tells a story. It's her plays are expressionistic. My plays are not. I can never write the way she writes, because the way she writes is really a function of how her brain conjures ideas, and my conjuring is really quite different. And and the way in which I organize, and one of the metaphors that I like to use when I'm teaching is how we live. And what I realize is that I write how I live, and that I grew up in a brownstone in Brooklyn that was never quite fully renovated, and in which It's very well organized, but I like to stuff lots of things in them. Like you can look behind me and you see all the pictures are on the wall. It's like I like every space to be covered, but still there's a sense of structure and order. And that's who I am as a writer. And there are other writers who grew up in little tiny apartments in which they had to keep everything neat and clean. And so everything's very tidy and they know where everything that is. And that's the way their brains function. So I think that when I was thinking about what is my voice is really extension of who I am as a human being and how I live my life and how I express myself. And once I became comfortable sort of living fully in the space that I created, I think I was able to find my voice and know that, I'm not someone who can live in a high rise. I have to live closer to the ground. I need a garden. I need to get outside. That's just who I am. And I think that that's part of figuring out what your voice is where you're comfortable living.
And Lynn, in this session, I know that we have participants who may still debate whether they'd like to commit to theater or not. What is theater these days? What is the future for performing arts? What would you say in terms of a message for generation that is still in a progress of finding out how to move on? And I'm especially asking you that question because I know that you very often go beyond the frame of theatrical doing and thinking. You're seeing the world, you're seeing people. And what would be a message for the generation to keep up with their dreams, how to maintain to be active?
One of the things I've been thinking a lot about just for the future generations and in this moment is how theater makers bring the totality of their beings to the making of their art, because I think that we've lived in a world in which everything has been so compartmentalized and rigid, and we've been beholden to these hierarchies that were created, 200 years ago. It's like we're still making theater the way that it was made at the turn of the century, and that really can no longer sustain the ways in which we as creative beings want to tell our stories. And so I think what I would tell young people is to really fully embrace all the ways in which you want to be an artist and not necessarily shoehorn yourself into doing one thing. And that's not to say that you shouldn't get good at your craft. I think that that's super important. If your interest in writing is that you become as good a writer as possible. But I think it's also important that if you're a visual artist, is you figure out how do I incorporate that visual art into the way in which I shape my stories. If you're an actor and a visual artist, it's like, how do I use this body to tell the complete story of who I am as an artist? And I think that this is a moment when we finally can do that, and that we do have many more tools. And so rather than thinking, how do I get an audition to be on that stage, is thinking, how do I create a piece that defies that stage? That disrupts the notion of what it means to be an artist in the 21st century. I think that right now, and I can speak for myself, I'm a little bored by the way in which we make theater. And if I feel that restless, I can only imagine how restless young people. It's like the thought of like sitting in that, at the very back of the theater and telling people what to do. I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to do it. I'm really happy, knock on wood. I feel immensely blessed, but I thought, I want to do so much more than that. And I encourage people really to follow their impulses and not be defined by the shapes and sizes of the theaters that have been built already. And that's my mantra, is like, resist the tyranny of the proscenium.
And we'll repeat this mantra every day, I promise. We're running out of time, unfortunately, but let's say we can invite one more question from the floor.
I have one. Hi, Ms. Nottage. It's a really big honor to meet you.
Hi, good to meet you.
I guess I've been noticing that, like, in my time here, like in my attempt to establish a presence in the American theater that has like this sort of unspoken like way of how to approach theater. What advice would you give like young theater makers such as myself on approaching an art form that has like this unspoken set of rules on how to go about it, I guess?
Yeah, it's such an interesting question, because it's like, on one hand I would say, to hell with the rules, but there are rules and there's certain paths that you have to take in order to succeed. But I would say to have a two-prong approach. It's, if at all possible, is to walk two paths. I think one of those paths is the traditional path, in which you submit your work and you do the workshops and you do all of the development. But I think the other alternative is figuring out, if that path doesn't work, what is the other path that I'm going to build for myself? How am I going to self-produce? How am I going to build those relationships so that I'm not dependent on traditional theaters in order to succeed? Because I think that when I was coming up as a Black theater artist, I didn't have the expectation that anyone was going to do my work. I just thought it just is never going to happen. Therefore, I'm going to create my own opportunities. And I remember early on, one of the very first things that I did in New York City was at a nightclub. And what we discovered is that the nightclub, people don't arrive usually until about 10:30 and 11 o'clock. And they had this 2-hour stretch between when the doors opened and when people came, in which no one was coming. And I said, well, what if I use those 2 hours? You have all the lighting, you have the sound system, and we put on a play. And that's how I did my first play. I thought, they have all the tools I need, and they have a little stage. And I thought, there's so many creative ways in which we can put our work up, but we get addicted to the notion of our work being on the big stages that have been created by the powers that be, not understanding that, storytelling can be anywhere that can sustain the weight of that story.
What a blast. Thank you very much, Lynn, and hopefully we'll see each other soon. We're here waiting for you in Williamstown, and some of us will be in New York also, hoping to see you.
Thank you.
At some places. Thank you indeed.
Thanks, Lynn. Take care.
care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
After the times of isolation, now is the time for in-person collaboration. Our department is ready to welcome our students and our audiences back to our spaces. This year, we are reclaiming our physical spaces for classes, rehearsals, performances, and presentations, all held in person. We offer classes on theory and practice, and we will be putting together new theater productions. By the way, can you see the space behind me, those empty seats? Come over and fill them up. Also, take the stage. We would love to have you.